Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, we live in a world that often drives us to take control, to be in the driver's seat of our lives, believing that if we don't act now, everything will spiral out of control. We are told to fight for what we want, to press our own agendas, to push until the doors open. And while determination has its place, there comes a time when we must ask ourselves, what does it mean to truly leave everything in God's hands? Leaving everything in God's hands is not a passive act. It is a conscious, active decision to place our trust, our hopes, our dreams, and yes, even our fears into the hands of the one who created the universe. It's about recognizing that no matter how much we plan, how hard we work, or how meticulously we try to organize our lives, there is a divine authority, a sovereign God, who knows the end from the beginning. When we try to control everything, we often find ourselves frustrated, anxious, and disillusioned. Why? Because control is an illusion. We think we can orchestrate the outcomes of our lives, but in truth, our perspective is limited. We only see what's in front of us. God, on the other hand, sees the entire picture, past, present, and future. To leave everything in God's hands means to trust in His divine sovereignty. It means we choose faith over fear. It means we believe that even when we don't understand the how or the why, God is still working things out for our good. You see, trust is not tested when everything is going smoothly. Trust is tested when the storms of life hit. And it's in those moments when the winds blow and the waves crash that we are called to let go and trust that God is in control. So often we panic because we don't see results immediately. We think if I don't act now, it's going to fall apart. But I want to remind you today that God's timing is perfect. His delays are not His denials. Sometimes He is preparing us for what He has already prepared for us. Sometimes He is building in us the character, the resilience, the faith that we will need to handle the blessing that is coming. Don't panic because of the delay. Trust in God's process. There is power in surrender. When we release our need to control every outcome, we make room for God to move in ways that we could never imagine. We open ourselves to divine intervention, to wisdom that is far beyond our own. Surrender is not weakness, it's strength. It's saying, God, I trust your wisdom over mine. I trust your will over my desires. I trust your timing over my impatience. And in this surrender, we find peace. It is not the kind of peace the world offers, which is dependent on circumstances. No, it is the peace that surpasses all understanding, the peace that comes from knowing that the same God who created the stars and holds the universe together holds you in the palm of His hand. My friends, to leave everything in God's hands is to live with a deep sense of purpose. It is to understand that every trial, every challenge, every detour is part of a greater plan. We don't have to worry because worry does nothing but drain us of the energy and focus we need. Worry cannot change the future, but trust in God can. When we talk about leaving everything in God's hands, we must first come to grips with the profound truth of His divine sovereignty. Sovereignty means that God is the supreme ruler of all things. He is not limited by time, space, or human understanding. He reigns over all creation, orchestrating every event, every circumstance according to His perfect will. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing slips through the cracks unnoticed by Him. We may struggle with this concept because as human beings, we tend to measure power and authority based on what we can control. But God's sovereignty is far greater than anything we could ever comprehend. His wisdom is infinite, His power is limitless, and His plan is flawless. He doesn't simply react to situations as they unfold. He has already planned the outcome. He knew you before you were born, and He knows the path of your life from start to finish. This truth challenges us to reframe how we approach life's uncertainties. When we understand that God is in control, truly in control, it should change the way we respond to trials, delays, and even moments of success. Instead of worrying about what's going to happen next, we can rest in the knowledge that God has already gone ahead of us. He knows what is coming and He has already made a way. We may not always understand His methods, but we can be confident that His purposes will prevail. It's important to remember that God's sovereignty does not mean He is distant or removed from our daily struggles. On the contrary, it means He is deeply involved in every detail of our lives. He cares about what we are going through, and His heart is for us. The one who commands the galaxies is the same one who numbers the hairs on your head. He knows every joy, every sorrow, every fear that you carry. And because of his sovereign power, he has the ability to bring good out of even the most difficult situations. So when we say leave everything in God's hands, we are not talking about resignation or passivity. We are talking about an active trust in his supreme authority. We are choosing to believe that his plan is better than ours, that his ways are higher than our ways. We are choosing to live with confidence, knowing that even when life feels out of control, it is never out of God's control. His sovereignty assures us that everything, from the smallest detail to the greatest decision, is under his care. This understanding of God's sovereignty should lead us to a place of deep peace. If God is for us, who can be against us? If the creator of the universe is on our side, why should we fear the uncertainties of life? The very essence of faith is built on the recognition that God is sovereign. And when we truly grasp this truth, we find freedom not in knowing every answer, but in knowing the one who holds all the answers in his hands. Faith is more than just a belief, it's a lifestyle, a way of living that reaches beyond the limitations of what we can see and into the realm of what we cannot yet understand. When we choose to live by faith, we are making a deliberate decision to trust in the unseen hand of God, even in the midst of uncertainty and fear. Fear, by its very nature, is rooted in the unknown. It thrives in situations where we lack control, where we cannot predict the outcome, where the path ahead is dim and filled with potential threats. But faith calls us to step into that very unknown with confidence, not because we have all the answers, but because we trust the one who does. In our human experience, fear is often a natural response to adversity. It's the mind's way of protecting us from perceived danger, from risks we don't feel ready to face. But the problem arises when fear begins to dominate our decisions and dictate our actions. Fear can paralyze us, keeping us from moving forward, from stepping into the fullness of what God has prepared for us. It creates an illusion of safety in staying still and holding back and avoiding risks. But in reality, it only keeps us locked in a prison of doubt and hesitation. Faith, however, invites us to rise above that fear. It doesn't deny that challenges exist, nor does it ignore the reality of life's difficulties. Instead, faith says, I see the storm, but I trust the one who calms the waves. I may not know what tomorrow holds, but I know who holds tomorrow. Faith is a conscious decision to believe that God is greater than any obstacle we face, that his power is stronger than our fears, and that his plans are better than anything we could imagine. When we walk by faith, we are no longer driven by the anxiety of what might happen. Fear asks, what if I fail? What if things don't work out the way I planned? Faith responds, even if I don't see the full picture, I trust that God is working all things together for my good. This is the essence of faith beyond fear. It's not the absence of fear, but the courage to move forward despite it. This kind of faith requires a shift in focus. Fear focuses on the problem, magnifying it until it seems insurmountable. Faith focuses on God, magnifying his power, his wisdom, and his love. When we fix our eyes on God, the size of our problems begins to shrink in comparison to his greatness. Fear will tell you to play it safe, to retreat, to hold on to what you know. But faith will challenge you to step out, to take risks, to trust that God's promises are true, even when everything around you seems to contradict them. There will always be moments in life that test the limits of our faith. Moments when the path forward is unclear, when the ground beneath us feels shaky. But it's in these moments that faith is strengthened. True faith is not just believing when everything is going well, it's believing when everything is falling apart, when the odds are stacked against you, and when you feel completely out of control. It's the faith that says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. God never promised us a life without challenges. He never said we wouldn't face trials or endure hardships. But he did promise that he would be with us through it all. That his strength would be made perfect in our weakness, and that he would never leave us nor forsake us. Faith beyond fear means resting in these promises, even when the waves are high and the wind is strong. It means understanding that no matter how bleak the situation looks, God is still in control and he is still working on your behalf. Faith is not passive, it is active. It requires action even in the face of fear. It asks us to step out, to take bold steps of obedience, even when we don't know where those steps will lead. Think of the story of Peter walking on water. As long as Peter kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to do the impossible. But the moment he shifted his focus to the storm around him, fear crept in and he began to sink. This is what happens when we allow fear to take precedence over faith. But the beauty of faith is that even when we start to sink, Jesus is there reaching out his hand to lift us up, to remind us that we are not alone in the storm. Fear is natural, but faith is supernatural. It transcends our human understanding and connects us to the power of God. And when we learn to live by faith, fear no longer has the final word in our lives. Instead, we find ourselves empowered by a strength that is not our own, a peace that surpasses all understanding, and a confidence that is rooted in the unshakable truth of who God is. Faith beyond fear is the foundation of a life lived in trust and surrender to God. It is the key to experiencing his peace, his provision, and his guidance even in the most uncertain times. It is the assurance that no matter what comes, we are held in the hands of a loving, sovereign God who has already written the victory into our story. In moments of uncertainty, we are often tempted to panic. Panic is a reaction that arises when we feel out of control, when situations don't go according to our plans, or when the future seems unclear. It clouds our judgment, distorts our perspective, and causes us to make impulsive decisions rooted in fear rather than faith. But there is a higher way, a way that leads to clarity, peace, and fulfillment. That way is purpose. Purpose is a powerful antidote to panic because it anchors us in something bigger than the immediate chaos we may be experiencing. When you understand your purpose, you realize that your life is not an accident. You were created with intention, and there is a plan for you that goes beyond your current situation. Purpose gives you the perspective that your present challenges are part of a larger story, a divine narrative that is unfolding in your life. The key to living with purpose is recognizing that everything you go through, every high, every low, every success, every failure is all working together to shape and prepare you for what God has called you to do. When you live with a sense of purpose, you begin to see setbacks as setups for something greater. You no longer view obstacles as reasons to quit, but as opportunities for growth and transformation. Panic, on the other hand, robs us of this perspective. When we panic, we lose sight of the bigger picture. Our minds become consumed with worst-case scenarios, and we begin to act out of desperation rather than divine direction. Panic convinces us that we must fix everything immediately, that we must solve all our problems right now, or else everything will fall apart. But purpose reminds us that there is a process at work, that God is not rushed or anxious, and neither should we be. Living with purpose requires us to trust in God's timing. Often panic comes when we feel like time is running out, when we believe that things aren't happening quickly enough or that we've missed an opportunity. But purpose teaches us patience. It reminds us that God's plan is unfolding exactly as it should, even when we can't see it. It tells us that every delay has a purpose, that every closed door is guiding us to the right one, and that the things we perceive as failures may actually be part of a much bigger success. When we focus on our purpose, we begin to operate from a place of calm and confidence. We are no longer driven by external pressures or internal fears. Instead, we move forward with a quiet assurance that we are right where we need to be, doing exactly what we need to be doing because God is guiding our steps. This is not a passive waiting, but an active pursuit of God's will. Purpose gives us direction and keeps us moving forward even when the path seems unclear. One of the greatest examples of purpose over panic is found in the life of Jesus. Throughout his ministry, he faced incredible pressure, opposition, and even threats to his life. Yet he never panicked. Why? Because he was completely aligned with his purpose. He knew that every step he took was ordained by the Father and that nothing could derail him from fulfilling his mission. Even in the face of betrayal, suffering, and death, he remained calm and focused because his purpose was clear. Similarly, when we align ourselves with the purpose God has for our lives, we can face challenges with a sense of peace and confidence. Purpose gives us a foundation that is unshakable, even when everything around us seems uncertain. It shifts our focus from the temporary problems we encounter to the eternal significance of our calling. Panic will always try to convince us that the situation is out of control and that we must act immediately to fix it. But purpose allows us to pause, to pray, and to seek God's wisdom before making any move. It reminds us that we are not called to solve every problem in our own strength, but to trust in the one who holds all things together. Purpose helps us discern the difference between urgent and important. Not every urgent situation is important in the grand scheme of our lives, and purpose keeps us grounded in what truly matters. Moreover, purpose helps us endure difficult seasons without losing hope. There will be times when life feels overwhelming, when the weight of responsibilities or the pain of circumstances threatens to crush us. In these moments, it's easy to panic and question whether we are on the right path. But when we have a deep sense of purpose, we understand that the trials we face are not meant to break us, but to refine us. They are shaping us, strengthening us, and preparing us for the next stage of our journey. Purpose over panic means trusting that God is always at work, even when we can't see it. It means believing that every step, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem, is leading us closer to the fulfillment of His plan for our lives. It is the confidence that comes from knowing that nothing is wasted. Every experience, every lesson, every struggle is part of our preparation. When we choose purpose over panic, we allow God to direct our paths rather than being led by our emotions. We are able to navigate life's challenges with grace and wisdom, knowing that we are not alone and that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. This is the power of living with purpose. It calms our fears, steadies our hearts, and keeps us moving forward with boldness and faith. In the end, purpose transforms how we experience life. It turns what could be moments of panic into opportunities for growth, trust, and deeper reliance on God. It gives us the strength to face uncertainty with courage and to walk confidently, knowing that we are living out the calling that God has placed on our lives. Surrender is often misunderstood as a sign of weakness or defeat. In a world that glorifies control, achievement, and self-reliance, surrender can seem like giving up or letting go of the fight. But in the kingdom of God, surrender is not about quitting, it's about trusting. It's a powerful, intentional act of faith where we release our need to control every outcome and place our lives into the hands of God, trusting that He knows best. Surrender is not about abandoning responsibility. Rather, it is about recognizing the limits of our own understanding and acknowledging God's infinite wisdom and sovereignty. When we surrender to God, we are making a conscious decision to let go of our will and submit to His. This does not mean we stop striving for excellence or pursuing our goals, but it means we stop striving in our own strength. We shift from self-reliance to God reliance. In surrender, we accept that we don't have all the answers and we don't need to, because we trust that God does. He sees the end from the beginning, and His plans for us are good, better than anything we could plan for ourselves. Surrender is powerful because it frees us from the pressure of having to control everything. So much of our anxiety comes from the belief that we must have everything figured out, that we must know exactly what's coming next and how to handle it. But the reality is, life is full of uncertainties, and no amount of planning or preparation can shield us from every unexpected turn. When we hold too tightly to control, we carry a weight that we were never meant to bear. We try to anticipate every problem, fix every issue, and prevent every failure. But in doing so, we often find ourselves drained, stressed, and overwhelmed. True surrender is an act of release. It's handing over that burden of control and saying, God, I trust you with this. It's a declaration that no matter what happens, we believe that God is working for our good and His glory. It allows us to experience a level of peace that is unattainable when we are trying to manage everything on our own. When we surrender, we open ourselves to the flow of God's grace and provision. We step out of the cycle of fear and frustration and into a place of rest, knowing that God is in control. Surrender is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice. It requires us to continually let go of our need to dictate the outcome and trust that God's plan is unfolding perfectly, even when we can't see it. This doesn't mean that life will be free of challenges, but it does mean that we face those challenges with a different perspective. Instead of asking, how can I fix this, or what if everything goes wrong? We begin to ask, God, what are you doing in this situation, and how can I align with your will in this moment? In moments of uncertainty, surrender teaches us to release our fear and choose faith. It's easy to trust God when things are going smoothly, but true surrender is tested in the face of difficulty. It's in the valleys of life that we are invited to let go of our own agenda and trust that God is leading us through for a purpose. We may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but we trust that God is working all things together for good. Surrender is also deeply connected to humility. To surrender is to admit that we don't have all the answers and that we are not in control of every detail of our lives. It is the recognition that we are dependent on God and that His strength is made perfect in our weakness. This humility opens the door for God to move in powerful ways because we are no longer trying to do everything in our own power. When we surrender, we make room for God to show up to do what only He can do. We allow Him to guide us, to direct our steps, and to work miracles in our lives that we could never orchestrate on our own. There is immense power in surrender because it invites divine intervention. When we release our grip on a situation and hand it over to God, we invite Him to step in and take control. We invite His wisdom, His strength, and His favor into areas where we may feel weak or overwhelmed. And the beauty of surrender is that it doesn't result in loss, it results in gain. By giving up our need for control, we gain peace. By relinquishing our plans, we make room for God's perfect plan. And by surrendering our will, we align ourselves with the purposes of God, which are far greater than anything we could imagine. One of the most profound examples of surrender is found in the life of Jesus. In the Garden of Gethsemane, facing the agony of the cross, Jesus prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." In that moment, He surrendered His desires, His fear, and even His life to the will of the Father. And through that surrender came the greatest victory, the salvation of humanity. Jesus' example teaches us that surrender is not about avoiding pain or difficulty, but about trusting that God's will is perfect, even when it leads us through seasons of trial. When we surrender, we allow God to write our story. We stop fighting against His plan and start cooperating with it. Surrender doesn't mean we won't face challenges, but it does mean that we will face them with a sense of purpose and peace, knowing that God is with us. It's in surrender that we discover the fullness of God's grace, the depth of His love, and the power of His provision. Surrendering to God doesn't mean we lose control of our lives. It means we place our lives in the hands of the one who knows us best, loves us most, and has our best interests at heart. It means trusting that His ways are higher than our ways and that His plans for all, always for our good. It's in this place of surrender that we find true freedom, peace, and strength to live out the purpose for which we were created. Patience in God's timing is one of the most challenging yet crucial lessons in the journey of faith. It requires us to trust in a divine timetable that often doesn't align with our own. In a world that moves at the speed of technology, where instant gratification is the norm and waiting is often seen as a sign of weakness or inefficiency, learning to be patient in God's timing can feel countercultural. But God's timing is not bound by our schedules, and His plans unfold in ways that are far deeper and more meaningful than we could ever orchestrate on our own. The key to understanding patience in God's timing begins with recognizing that God's perspective is eternal. He sees the entire span of our lives from beginning to end, and beyond that, He views our lives in the context of His grand plan for humanity. While we may focus on immediate desires, needs, or outcomes, God is concerned with the long-term growth and transformation of our character. He is not just interested in what we accomplish, but in who we are becoming. Often the seasons of waiting are not meant to withhold blessings from us, but to shape and prepare us for those blessings in ways we may not yet understand. Patience requires trust, and trust is rooted in the belief that God is good, even when His timing seems delayed. It's easy to trust when everything is going according to our plans, but true faith is tested in the waiting. It's during these times that we must cling to the promises of God, even when we don't see immediate results. The Bible is full of stories where God's people had to wait sometimes for years, even decades before His promises were fulfilled. Abraham waited 25 years for the birth of Isaac. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years before entering the promised land, and David waited many years from the time he was anointed as king to when he actually took the throne. These stories remind us that waiting is often a necessary part of God's plan and that his timing is always perfect. Patience also requires us to release control. In our human nature, we want to force things to happen on our timeline. We want to manipulate situations, push doors open, and create opportunities when we feel they should arrive. But when we try to take matters into our own hands, we often end up creating more problems than solutions. We may experience temporary satisfaction, but we miss out on the fullness of what God intended for us. There's a difference between what we can achieve through our own efforts and what God can bring into our lives through his divine orchestration. When we force our own timing, we settle for less than what God wants to give us. But when we wait on him, we receive blessings that exceed our expectations. Patience in God's timing also teaches us the value of preparation. Sometimes we are not ready for what we are asking God for, and he, in his wisdom, delays the answer to ensure that we are adequately prepared. There may be lessons we need to learn, maturity we need to gain, or experiences we need to have before we can fully step into the blessing God has for us. The waiting season then is not wasted time. It is a period of refining and equipping where God works on our hearts, develops our character, and strengthens our faith. It is during these times that God shapes us into the people we need to be to carry the responsibility that comes with his blessing. The process may be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. And when the fulfillment of God's promise finally arrives, we are able to appreciate it more fully because we are ready to receive it. One of the most beautiful aspects of God's timing is that it often brings about outcomes that we never could have anticipated. While we are waiting for one thing, God may be aligning other things in our lives that we didn't even know we needed. His timing is multidimensional, working on various levels to bring about the best possible outcome for us. What may feel like a delay is often God's way of aligning the right people, the right opportunities, and the right circumstances to ensure that his will is accomplished in the most meaningful and impactful way. However, patience doesn't mean passivity. Waiting on God is not about sitting back and doing nothing. It's about actively trusting, praying, and preparing for what's to come. Patience in God's timing means living with a sense of expectation, knowing that at the right moment, God will act. It's about being faithful in the small things, staying obedient to his word, and continuing to cultivate the gifts and talents he has placed within us, even while we wait for the bigger picture to unfold. We don't stop moving forward in faith just because the answer hasn't come yet. Instead, we continue to walk in faith, knowing that every step is part of the journey toward the fulfillment of God's promise. In the end, patience in God's timing is about surrendering our timeline to his. It's about acknowledging that his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. It's about believing that even though we don't understand why things are taking so long, God is still in control and he is working all things together for our good. Patience in God's timing means trusting that he has not forgotten us and that the delay is not denial. It's about knowing that when the time is right, nothing can stop his plan from coming to pass. Ultimately, patience in God's timing produces a deeper, more resilient faith. It stretches our trust in God and deepens our reliance on him. It teaches us to wait with hope, to persevere in prayer, and to keep our eyes fixed on the one who holds the future. When we learn to be patient in God's timing, we develop a faith that is not shaken by delays or detours. We become anchored in the truth that God is faithful to his promises and that his timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't match our own. Dependence and independence are two concepts that we often navigate in life, especially when it comes to our relationship with God. Society frequently teaches us to strive for independence, self-sufficiency, personal autonomy, and the ability to take care of ourselves without needing anyone else. We are encouraged to rely on our own strength, intelligence, and resources. While independence is valuable in certain areas, such as developing responsibility and maturity, there is a significant difference between healthy independence and the spiritual life God calls us to live. When we talk about dependence in the context of faith, we are referring to our reliance on God for guidance, provision, and strength. This kind of dependence is not a weakness. Rather, it is an acknowledgement of our human limitations and our need for divine help. Spiritual dependence on God is about understanding that we were never meant to do life on our own. It is recognizing that no matter how capable or accomplished we may be, there are things beyond our control and beyond our ability to handle. There are situations, decisions, and challenges that require wisdom, power, and provision that only God can provide. Independence, on the other hand, often tempts us to live in self-reliance. It can lead us to believe that we have all the answers, that we can manage everything ourselves, and that we don't need anyone else, including God. This type of independence can be dangerous because it distances us from our Creator and shifts our trust from Him to ourselves. We begin to lean on our own understanding, our own resources, and our own abilities, which, while significant, are limited in comparison to God's infinite wisdom and power. There is a balance to be struck between healthy independence and the deep dependence on God that is essential for a thriving spiritual life. God created us with gifts, talents, and abilities, and He expects us to use them responsibly. He gives us the capacity to make decisions, solve problems, and work towards goals. In this sense, independence is important because it allows us to step into the fullness of who we are and take responsibility for our lives. However, true independence should never mean disconnecting from God. It should not lead to a mindset where we think we no longer need His involvement in our daily lives. The tension between dependence and independence is clearly seen in the way we approach challenges. When faced with difficulty, the independent mindset says, I can handle this. I've got it under control. The dependent mindset, however, says, I need God's help in this situation. I don't have all the answers, but I trust that God does. Dependence on God is not about abandoning our efforts or becoming passive. It's about partnering with Him, knowing that while we do our part, God is the ultimate source of success and provision. There's a profound strength in dependence on God because it opens the door for His supernatural intervention. When we acknowledge that we need Him, we invite His power and wisdom into our lives. Dependence on God brings peace even in the midst of uncertainty because we know we are not carrying the burden alone. We don't have to figure out every detail, control every outcome, or solve every problem on our own. God in His goodness is walking with us, guiding us, and providing for us every step of the way. One of the greatest dangers of unchecked independence is that it can lead to pride. We may start to believe that our achievements, our success, and our progress are all due to our own efforts. This mindset pushes God to the background and we begin to place ourselves at the center. But independence without God is a fragile thing. No matter how successful or strong we think we are, life has a way of reminding us of our limitations. There will always be situations that are bigger than us, problems that are beyond our ability to solve, and challenges that remind us that we are not in control. In these moments, dependence on God becomes not just an option, but a necessity. True spiritual maturity involves recognizing when to rely on the strength God has given us and when to depend completely on Him. It's about understanding that, yes, we can do a lot in our own strength, but we can do so much more when we rely on God. Dependence on God doesn't diminish our abilities, it enhances them. It allows us to operate in the fullness of who we are, not by our might or power, but by the Spirit of God working through us. Jesus Himself demonstrated the perfect balance of dependence and independence during His time on earth. Though He was fully God and had all power and authority, He lived in complete dependence on the Father. He regularly withdrew to pray, seeking guidance and strength from His Father, and made it clear that He was doing the will of the one who sent Him. Jesus could have operated in complete independence, but He chose to model for us what it looks like to live in full reliance on God. His dependence on the Father was not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of His deep trust in the Father's plan. As followers of Christ, we are called to live in a similar state of dependence. It's about knowing that while we have been given gifts, talents, and responsibilities, we are ultimately dependent on God for direction, strength, and sustenance. It's about maintaining a posture of humility, recognizing that apart from God, we can do nothing of eternal value. Our independence in the world must be tempered with our dependence on the one who created us, sustains us, and leads us. In the end, the relationship between dependence and independence is not about choosing one over the other, but about integrating both into our walk with God. Healthy independence allows us to take initiative, make decisions, and use our abilities to the fullest. But spiritual dependence keeps us rooted in the truth that all we have and all we are comes from God. It keeps us connected to the source of life, wisdom, and power, ensuring that we never stray too far from the one who knows us best and has a perfect plan for our lives. True freedom comes not from being completely independent, but from being dependent on God while fully using the gifts and strength He has given us. Faith in the midst of trials is one of the greatest tests of our spiritual journey. It's easy to have faith when life is smooth, when everything is falling into place, and when we can see the fruits of our prayers. But the real test of faith comes when the storms of life hit, when we face uncertainty, pain, loss, or disappointment. It's in these moments of trial that faith becomes more than a concept. It becomes the anchor that holds us steady when everything else seems to be falling apart. Trials, by their very nature, challenge our sense of security and control. They shake the foundations of what we think we know and push us into places of discomfort, often revealing the areas where we've been leaning on our own strength instead of God's. Faith, however, is not about denying the reality of the struggle. It's not about pretending that everything is fine when it's not. Faith is about trusting in God's goodness and His sovereignty, even when the circumstances don't make sense. It's about believing that God is still in control, even when life feels chaotic. One of the greatest truths about faith is that it's not based on feelings. In the midst of trials, our emotions can be all over the place. Fear, anger, confusion, and sorrow can cloud our judgment. But faith goes beyond feelings. It's a deep-rooted trust in who God is, regardless of how we feel in the moment. Faith says, I don't understand why this is happening, but I know that God is faithful. I don't see the way forward, but I believe that God has a plan. I may be in pain, but I trust that God is still good. Trials often have a way of refining our faith. Just like gold is purified in the fire, our faith is strengthened and purified through the trials we face. It's in the fire of hardship that our reliance on God becomes more profound, that our trust in Him is tested and proven. In these moments, we learn that faith is not a fragile thing to be shattered by difficulty, but a resilient force that grows stronger when it's tested. When we walk through trials with faith, we come out on the other side not weaker, but stronger, but deeper and stronger, with a deeper understanding of God's faithfulness. One of the most powerful examples of faith in the midst of trials is found in the story of Job. Job lost everything, his wealth, his health, and even his family, yet in the midst of his pain, he declared, though He slay me, yet will I trust Him, Job 13:15. Job's faith was not based on his circumstances. It was rooted in his relationship with God. He didn't understand why he was suffering, but he knew that God was still worthy of his trust and worship. Job's story teaches us that faith is not dependent on our circumstances, but on the character of God. Even when life doesn't make sense, we can trust that God is still good and that His plans for us are still for our good. Another key aspect of faith during trials is the ability to see beyond the present moment. Trials often make us feel stuck, as though the pain and difficulty will never end. But faith lifts our eyes beyond the current struggle to the promises of God. It reminds us that trials are temporary, but God's love and His plans for us are eternal. The Bible encourages us in 2 Corinthians 4:17-18, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Faith helps us to see the bigger picture, to understand that God is using the trials we face to produce something greater in us, something that will outlast the temporary pain. Trials also teach us to depend more fully on God. When everything is going well, it's easy to think that we have everything under control, that we don't need to lean on God as much. But trials strip away that illusion of self-sufficiency. They remind us of our limitations and drive us back to the one who is limitless. In our weakness, we discover the strength of God. In our confusion, we find His wisdom. And in our pain, we experience His comfort. Faith in trials is not about avoiding pain, but about leaning into God's presence in the midst of it. It's about knowing that we are not walking through the valley alone, but that God is with us, guiding us, sustaining us, and carrying us through. Moreover, faith in trials can be a witness to others. When people see us trusting God in the midst of hardship, it speaks volumes about the reality of our faith. It shows that our relationship with God is not just about getting blessings or having an easy life, but that it's rooted in something deeper. When we hold on to our faith in trials, we reflect the steadfastness of God's love and His promises. Others may be inspired by our example, and our faith can become a source of encouragement and strength for them in their own struggles. There's also a profound peace that comes with having faith in the midst of trials. This peace doesn't come from our circumstances, but from knowing that God is in control even when we are not. Philippians 4:6-7 reminds us, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This is the kind of peace that defies logic, the kind that allows us to remain calm and hopeful even in the most difficult situations, because we trust that God is working all things for our good. In the end, faith in the midst of trials is about holding on to hope, even when the way forward seems unclear. It's about trusting in God's timing, believing that He is working behind the scenes in ways we cannot see. It's about persevering even when the road is hard, because we know that God's promises never fail. Trials will come, but they do not define us. Our faith does. And when we stand firm in our faith during the hardest times, we demonstrate the unshakable power of trusting in God. Our faith, refined through trials, becomes a testimony of God's grace and faithfulness in our lives. Letting go of worry is an act of faith that requires both trust in God and a shift in our mindset. Worry is something we all struggle with at times, especially in a world full of uncertainty and challenges. We worry about our future, our finances, our relationships, our health, and countless other aspects of life. It's part of our human nature to want to control outcomes, and when we feel like we can't, worry takes over. But the problem with worry is that it doesn't change anything. It drains our energy, clouds our thinking, and robs us of peace. Yet it doesn't solve the problems we are concerned about. God never intended for us to live in a constant state of anxiety. In fact, the Bible repeatedly tells us not to worry. In Matthew 6:25-34, Jesus gives one of the most powerful teachings on worry, urging us not to be anxious about our lives, what we will eat, drink, or wear, because God knows our needs. Jesus tells us to look at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. They don't worry about provision, yet God takes care of them. And if God takes care of the birds and the flowers, how much more will He take care of us, His children? Letting go of worry starts with understanding that worry stems from a place of fear and uncertainty. We worry because we fear the unknown, fear failure, fear loss, or fear that things won't turn out the way we hope. But fear is the opposite of faith. When we allow fear to dominate our thinking, we are essentially saying that we don't trust God's ability to handle our situation. Letting go of worry requires us to replace fear with faith, to believe that God is not only aware of our situation, but is actively working in it, even when we can't see how. Trusting in God's sovereignty is key to letting go of worry. When we worry, it's often because we feel like everything depends on us. We feel like we have to figure out every detail, manage every outcome, and make sure everything goes according to plan. But the truth is, we are not in control, God is. And when we recognize that He is sovereign over every aspect of our lives, we can release the need to control everything. We can rest in the knowledge that God is in control, that He knows the beginning from the end, and that He is working all things for our good. This doesn't mean we are passive or that we don't plan and make wise decisions, but it means we don't carry the burden of worry because we trust that God's plan is greater than ours. Another important step in letting go of worry is learning to live in the present moment. Worry is often rooted in either the past or the future. We dwell on past mistakes, missed opportunities, or hurtful experiences, or we become anxious about what might happen in the future. But when we focus too much on the past or future, we miss what God is doing in the present. Jesus emphasized the importance of focusing on today, saying in Matthew 6:34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. God gives us grace for each day, and when we stay present, trusting Him for today, we free ourselves from the weight of tomorrow's worries. Prayer is another powerful tool in letting go of worry. Philippians 4:6-7 tells us, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. When we feel overwhelmed by worry, prayer is our way of handing over our burdens to God. It's an exchange. We give God our anxieties and he gives us his peace. The peace that comes from God is not dependent on our circumstances. It's a supernatural peace that calms our hearts even in the midst of uncertainty. When we pray, we invite God into our situation and acknowledge that he is in control. Letting go of worry also requires us to shift our focus. Worry often consumes us because we are focused on the problem, not the solution. But when we shift our focus from the problem to God, we begin to see things differently. Instead of being overwhelmed by the size of our problem, we are reminded of the greatness of our God. Psalm 121:1-2 says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. When we fix our eyes on God, who is bigger than any problem we face, worry loses its grip on us. We start to see our challenges through the lens of faith, knowing that nothing is too difficult for God. Worry also often involves us imagining worst-case scenarios, but the truth is most of the things we worry about never come to pass. We spend so much mental and emotional energy preparing for things that may never happen. Letting go of worry means choosing to focus on the reality of God's faithfulness rather than the what-ifs of life. Even if the worst-case scenario happens, God will still be with us. He will still provide, protect, and guide us through it. Knowing that God is with us no matter what allows us to release our worries because we are confident that he will not abandon us no matter how difficult the situation may become. Ultimately, letting go of worry is about trusting in God's character. It's about believing that he is good, that he loves us, and that he has our best interests at heart. When we truly believe that God is for us, not against us, it becomes easier to let go of the fear that drives worry. We can rest in the assurance that God is not surprised by our challenges, that he already knows the solution, and that he is leading us toward his purpose for our lives. Letting go of worry is a daily practice. It's not something we do once and never struggle with again. Each day brings new challenges, new uncertainties, and new reasons to worry. But each day also brings new opportunities to trust God. As we continually choose to place our worries in God's hands, we grow in our faith and experience the peace that comes from trusting in his care. Instead of living under the weight of worry, we begin to live in the freedom that comes from knowing that our lives are secure in the hands of a loving and faithful God. God's peace serves as a powerful guide in our lives, providing direction, comfort, and assurance in the midst of uncertainty and chaos. In a world often filled with turmoil, anxiety, and confusion, the peace of God stands out as a beacon of hope and stability. This peace is not merely the absence of conflict or trouble. Rather, it is a profound sense of tranquility that comes from knowing we are in right relationship with God. It transcends circumstances and allows us to navigate life's challenges with grace and confidence. One of the most remarkable aspects of God's peace is its ability to guard our hearts and minds. Philippians 4:7 tells us, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This peace acts as a protective shield, keeping our hearts from being overwhelmed by fear, worry, and doubt. It serves as a reminder that we can trust in God's promises and that he is ultimately in control of our lives. When we encounter difficulties, it is this peace that calms our anxious thoughts and steadies our emotions, reminding us that we are not alone and that God is with us every step of the way. Experiencing God's peace begins with establishing a deep relationship with him through prayer, worship, and the study of his word. The more we draw near to God, the more we come to understand his character and his ways. This knowledge cultivates a sense of trust that allows us to release our burdens and fears into his capable hands. When we approach God in prayer, we invite his peace into our situations. It is in these moments of communion with him that we begin to experience the comforting presence of the Holy Spirit, who brings peace to our troubled hearts. In the face of difficult decisions or uncertain futures, God's peace becomes our compass. When we seek his guidance, we can rely on his peace to direct our paths. Colossians 3:15 encourages us to let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. This ruling peace acts as an arbiter in our decision-making processes, helping us discern the right choices and leading us away from paths that might bring anxiety or unrest. When we are faced with multiple options, the presence of God's peace can be a clear indicator of His will. If a decision brings about peace in our hearts, it is often a sign that we are aligned with God's purpose. Moreover, God's peace empowers us to face challenges with courage. In times of hardship, we may feel overwhelmed by the weight of our circumstances. However, when we anchor ourselves in God's peace, we can face these challenges with a sense of calmness and assurance. This peace is not based on our understanding of the situation, but rather on our trust in God's sovereignty. It reassures us that even when we cannot see the way forward, God is working on our behalf and that He will never leave us or forsake us. Additionally, God's peace encourages us to extend grace to ourselves and others. In a world that often demands perfection and creates an environment of comparison, it can be easy to become critical of ourselves and those around us. However, when we embrace God's peace, we learn to view ourselves through the lens of His love and grace. We understand that we are imperfect beings in need of a Savior, and this realization allows us to be more compassionate toward ourselves and others. When we operate from a place of peace, we foster an atmosphere of acceptance and understanding, promoting unity and harmony in our relationships. Furthermore, God's peace is a source of strength in the midst of trials. It reassures us that we do not have to rely solely on our own strength to endure difficult times. Instead, we can draw from the wellspring of God's peace, which sustains us and empowers us to persevere. This strength enables us to face life's challenges with a sense of purpose, knowing that our struggles are not in vain and that God is using them to mold us into the individuals He has called us to be. In moments of weakness, God's peace becomes our strength, reminding us that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. It is important to recognize that God's peace is not always accompanied by immediate change in our circumstances. Sometimes we may find ourselves in prolonged periods of trial or uncertainty, and while God's peace is present, the challenges we face may not resolve quickly. In these times, it is crucial to remember that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of God in the midst of it. God's peace assures us that we are held securely in His hands, regardless of the storms we may be navigating. In our journey of faith, we can cultivate an awareness of God's peace by practicing gratitude and mindfulness. Regularly reflecting on the blessings in our lives can shift our focus away from worries and fears. When we acknowledge God's goodness and faithfulness, we position ourselves to experience His peace more profoundly. Mindfulness in the context of our faith involves being present in the moment and recognizing God's hand at work in our daily lives. By focusing on His presence, we can experience peace even in the most ordinary moments. Ultimately, God's peace is a gift that invites us to trust Him fully. It calls us to let go of our worries, fears, and anxieties and to place our confidence in His perfect plan. The more we learn to rely on God's peace, the more we will find ourselves navigating life with a sense of calm and assurance regardless of our circumstances. Embracing God's peace as our guide transforms our perspective and empowers us to live boldly and faithfully, knowing that we are cherished children of a loving and sovereign God. In this journey of faith, let us continually seek His peace, allowing it to guide us through life's challenges and uncertainties, leading us into the fullness of His purpose and promise. In conclusion, leaving everything in God's hands is not just a passive act. It is a profound expression of faith and trust in His divine sovereignty. We are called to surrender our worries, fears, and uncertainties, allowing God's peace to guide our hearts and minds. As we navigate the complexities of life, we are reminded that faith is our anchor in the storm, empowering us to face trials with courage and resilience. Understanding the true nature of God's peace equips us to rise above worry and doubt, enabling us to embrace the present moment and focus on His goodness. As we cultivate a deep relationship with God, seeking Him in prayer and Scripture, we find that He transforms our anxieties into assurance, leading us toward a life marked by purpose rather than panic. Letting go of our need for control and relying on God's timing fosters a sense of patience and dependence that enriches our spiritual journey. We learn that faith in the midst of trials refines us, deepening our character and drawing us closer to Him. Ultimately, as we release our burdens into God's capable hands, we not only find solace, but also become a reflection of His grace and peace to others. So I encourage you today to embrace the power of surrender. Trust in God's plans, rest in His promises, and allow His peace to guide you through the uncertainties of life. As you let go of worry and lean into faith, you will discover the profound joy and freedom that come from knowing that your life is safely held in the hands of a loving God. Remember, you are not alone on this journey. God is with you every step of the way. Embrace His peace and let it lead you to a life filled with hope, purpose, and unshakable faith.